You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 228 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj, Bhojwani as always. This week on the pod, we are going to predict what is getting banned next. This coming Monday, the ban and restricted, I almost mixed it up with suspended there, Pankaj, restricted announcement will drop and we will find out the fate of our Overlord Gravy, of our little warrior that could be, it's not a warrior, more of an assassin, Slippy. Maybe
I can't believe you said warrior there. Like, that is just so painful to the soul. That was personal, actually. Yeah, exactly. Calling Slippy a warrior. It's what warrior wishes they could be.
Well, we will find out all those things on Monday, but we are going to talk about what our predictions are for that, plus also the possible impacts as we head towards Super Slam. But of course, as always, Pankaj, how was your week? Been in flesh and blood. Of course, what the listeners don't know is that we're recording this just 2 days after our last podcast record because I'm about to head away on holiday. We'll talk, I guess, more about that in the news maybe. But yeah, what have you been doing the last 2 days? You played any flesh and blood? Copenhagen's on as we speak right now.
So yeah, Hayden is abandoning me for 3 weeks, and so we're recording super early. We're basically recording 2 days after we recorded last week's podcast. So not too much flesh and blood playing. And as we're recording, only day one of Copenhagen has ended. So the timing for the live stream, unfortunately, didn't quite work for me. It starts 1 a.m. my time, so I didn't tune into it live. But the moment I woke up this morning, I did look back and watch the VOD of the games I wanted to watch, the interesting ones. There was a Katsu game, and I want to look at that because obviously I think Katsu is a fine spot in this current metagame, so I wanted to watch that. I watched the Gravy versus Verdens game. I believe Bartor was playing the Gravy side, and there was one other game I watched as well.
Phi Gravy?
I forget which one it is. Sorry?
The Phi and Gravy.
Oh, yes, Phi. Yeah. Yes, the Phi versus Gravy. I wanted to see how impactful Phi was. I was wondering whether the Sunken Treasure and Seafloor Salvage could mess up the Phoenix Flames enough to the point where Phi maybe can't get too much traction. Turned out it didn't quite matter. A little bit of a spoiler. But yeah, so I was watching those games. So that's been my 2 days since we last spoke, Hayden, basically tuning into day one of Copenhagen. What about you?
Yeah, no, basically the same. I mean, it's literally been a couple of days, so not too much from my side. I did watch a little bit. I am going to watch this tonight. Is probably my plan. We'll probably catch up this afternoon, and then I'll probably watch some of the live tonight because it's late evening for me. I'll be able to watch maybe a couple of rounds before I head off to bed. The one round I did, like when I checked this morning, that I did flick to was actually there was a Slippy versus a Cilio matchup, and that's a matchup I'm quite interested in. Obviously, it's a Slippy player, so. Yeah, but otherwise, as you say, it's only been a couple of days. Maybe we can talk about that now. I am away for the next 3 weeks, so Pankaj has some guest hosts coming in over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm excited to listen to the podcast for once, as someone consuming the content as opposed to creating it.
Mm-hmm. Which does remind me, I do need to find some guest hosts. So I'm going to try and figure out who I want to invite on the pod to have a few chats.
Maybe our listeners can help out. Maybe our listeners can help out. If you've got any suggestions of people you would like to hear on Arsenal Pass, maybe previous guests that you would like to see return and spend an episode with Pankaj, or maybe guests we haven't had before that you think would be interesting guests to have on Arsenal Pass, drop it in the comments on YouTube.
I will be referencing one of the guest episodes later in the main pod. Mm-hmm. So look out for that one, and you can let me know whether you want that guest to come back on as a repeat guest. Other than that, in the news, the ban list is coming out on Monday, which is what we'll be discussing in the main topic, our predictions for what should be banned or what might be banned. Other than that, like I said, we are recording early. We only have day one Copenhagen results. We don't know who the winner is, but congrats to whoever wins it. And the Balhardened as well.
Yeah. Wow, I can't believe Insert X won here on Insert X deck. Congratulations.
Insert Gravy Bones. It's Gravy Bones winning, but we don't know who yet. We don't know the pilot.
All right. Fair enough.
That's my prediction.
I think that's very safe prediction,
for the
probably.
news. Yeah, I think that's it for the news.
Yeah, let's go on for Commander Cookout. And as always, if you want to get your questions in for Commander Cookout, please do so. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it is a Commander Cookout question. Or if you are maybe an audio listener on Spotify, you can drop it in the Spotify comments there. Very handy little tool on Spotify there. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop us maybe potentially a handwritten note in the next sort of coming weeks or months at events that you might see either of us at. Make sure, as always, you put your name and everything on that. Maybe I'll just remind people of that one the week before we go to an event. If you want, if you're a Arsenal Pass Patreon subscriber, you can drop it in our patrons Discord in the channel there, like Sigma Chaos Brute has done. Sigma had a couple of questions on our podcast over the years, and I think this is a great question, which comes from our Discord, as we said. I was hearing another podcast where they said Gravy is the hardest deck that ever was released in Flesh and Blood. Do you agree? What are the hardest heroes decks to you? What weighs in as a deck to be hard to play? As another example, Brutes are probably a class that tricks players in for perceived simplicity, but in the end, they're some of the most difficult decks to win and extract full value with. So what would be a fair comparison between Levia, that is considered one of the hardest decks to play to win by their pilots, although one of the most powerful, and Gravy, and what hard to play may be, and how worth it is to learn these hard heroes instead of easier, powerful ones? Well, I can kick us off if you like. I think this is an interesting question. There's a couple of different facets to this question. One, I think there's a difference between, I think, the level of how difficult a hero is to play and the level of, I think what people often confuse is that with decks that I think are underpowered, or heroes that are potentially underpowered or not tier 1, maybe not even tier 2 at times, that to win games, you really do have to extract every single point of value that you possibly can. And I think people confuse that with being a very hard to play hero. I'm going to use Levia as an example. I don't actually think Levia is particularly that hard to play once you master understanding how to look after your blood debt, how to take appropriate risks with the hero, and you do have to take risks with that hero. You have to understand like what points you need to be playing towards potential blood debt impact, not playing towards blood debt impact. Trying to understand what your opponent is going to be doing is important, because how they play into you matters a lot as to what might happen through the mid game and the end game. But having played quite a lot of Levia early on, I think once you master a lot of the sort of core concepts of that hero, I personally don't feel it's among the top 5 most difficult heroes to play, I would say, personally.
That's such an interesting sentence, because it feels like you said it's not hard to play until you do the hard thing of
I think once you've mastered those concepts,
you've
mastered those concepts, I think of understanding like the impact of your blood debt, getting some of those like sort of key metrics of when you should or shouldn't do things. I don't think your turn-to-turn decisions are particularly difficult.
Interesting. But isn't that what defines a hard deck? That there's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to learn about it and know and recognize which positions you are to know which direction you're supposed to be taking.
Yes, but I think there's much harder decks to do that with. I think there's much harder decks to do that with than Levia.
Yeah. To be fair, when I first saw this question, Levia wasn't one of the first decks that came to my mind. I have a few other decks I would come to, but I would put Levia in the more difficult category than average, I would say. I think there's a lot of particularly like Arsenal decisions and planning for the future and graveyard management. It does tax quite a bit. It just asks quite a bit of you, I think, to play optimally, to not trip yourself up while also being aware of what your opponent doing and how your opponent might try and trip you up. Like, especially being aware of niche things, like some heroes have random graveyard interaction that can actually totally mess you up. Like, I think the new Levia matchup, for example, like playing against a good Levia, I could definitely feel the difference in like how much they understood that I couldn't mess with their graveyard and like them playing around it and things like that. So I do feel like she offers quite a bit of skill ceiling. But yeah, I'm with you. It's not the first deck that comes to mind when it comes to most difficult decks in the game. But I do think it is a difficult one. Also, real quick, I believe Sigma, when they're talking about the other podcast, I think they're referencing the Runaways podcast over here. Shout out Runaways podcast. I do enjoy listening to them as well. Also, Chaos Brute as a title. I don't know how I've not noticed this before, but I have a bit of a philosophical question back to you, Sigma, if you want to reply to us in the Discord or something. Isn't every brute a chaos brute?
By nature.
Carry on, Hayden. Yes.
I think you hit on a really good point here, which is about, I guess, references my first point, which is that a lot of these heroes that aren't some of the best heroes in the game, you do have to play optimally. And I think people confuse, or they get focused on this fact of like, well, this hero is so hard because if you don't play optimally, you're not going to win games. And like, yeah, that is true. But that doesn't mean that it's more complex than other heroes. It just means that it's worse than other heroes. And I think Levira is maybe a slightly different case in the fact that, as I have referenced in many, many episodes, I think that hero just fundamentally does not work. So there's other heroes that I think are particularly complex in terms of some of the like the turn-to-turn decisions, even not super complex, but have a lot of, you're speaking about before, this adoption curve of having to learn a couple of things. You challenged me back on that one, which, yeah, fair enough. I think there is a lot of heroes that have to learn specific sort of interactions or what decks can do to them, or different points of the game where they have to manage resources and things like that. But some of those heroes are worse than Levia, some of those heroes are better than Levia. And I think those ones that are better, in some ways, a lot of the time are more powerful and a bit more forgiving. So I wanted to kind of set that preamble up because we're going to talk about Gravy specifically, I guess, to this question, and then maybe some other heroes that I think the way you can look at it is a bit of an adoption curve. So how hard or easy is a lot of the core fundamentals of that hero to learn to get you to say, I'm going to say 80% proficiency with the hero. How many, so for instance, I think there's some decks that are fairly simple to do that with. Some of the like pretty linear aggressive decks over the years, I think, have been in that camp. I think Syndra, Fire, a lot of those Draconic ninjas have been in that. Getting to 80% is not particularly difficult, but what I would say with those heroes is once you get to that 80%, that curve then starts to steeply increase in terms of how difficult it is to master the play patterns and some of the things with the hero. Whereas other heroes you have from immediacy of picking up the hero, like for instance, I think Kano in a lot of ways, to get the core concepts down, there's a lot of core concepts, and if you misplay because you only have 30 life, you will get severely punished, back to our original point. So I think there is a bit of an adoption curve with how difficult these heroes are to. I would say the two key points you're looking for is 80% proficiency, and then I'm going to say 95 because I don't think anyone is ever 100% proficient with any deck in this game.
I think that makes sense. I do like the paradigm. Although I will say, I do think just the nature of the game is that every hero is difficult to go from 80% to 95%. Like, yes. I do agree with you. Like, Fi, Syndra, these are more the linear decks. I'll put Aurora in that category as well, where getting to 80% was, like, a lot easier compared to a bunch of these other decks, like, compared to, like, something like Gravy or even Chain. But every single deck is hard to go from 80% to 95%. So I suppose our paradigm for how hardest decks is, I guess we're focusing more on the getting to the 80%. Is that how we're defining this?
Well, yeah. So I guess that's kind of my point about Levira is I think it's pretty middle of the pack when it comes to getting to that 80% versus some of the other heroes. And then people point to like, but to win games you need to be that 95, and it's like, well, sure, but I think getting to 90, to your point, getting from 80 to 95% proficiency with most heroes in this game, I would say the angle of that adoption curve is fairly similar, right? Like to your point, it's very close. It's hard with a lot of these heroes to get to. There's some nuances, I think, where some heroes are, you've got pitch stacking involved. You've got these other concepts which might be a little bit more complex in that last final 15%. But I'd say it's fairly close in terms of almost any hero is difficult to get to that 95% with, or at least above that 80%.
Yeah, actually, I know I brought that point up, but I feel like I want to challenge myself on that. I'm not sure if I agree with that anymore, because I do think it's harder to go from 80 to 95 on a deck like Gravy or Dromai, or even Icelander, than it is for something like Aurora or Syndra or Fi. Like, I think it's like
closer. It's closer. It's closer than the first 80%. That's for sure on some other decks,
sure.
right?
Yeah. That we can agree on. Anyway, so should we answer the question for like some examples of what we think have been the hardest decks in the game?
Yeah, I guess I want to firstly just tackle Gravy, and like the question was, do you agree? I personally don't agree. I don't think Gravy is the hardest deck, and I'll take the hits from people if they want to drop in the comments. I think it is fairly, I would say, particularly getting to 80% with Gravy, I think is quite complex. I don't think that final 15% is too different to many other decks. Like, you have to make really good lines to have success with a lot of decks. And I would say decks like, especially board state decks, right? Gravy, Enigma, Dromai, all these decks. I do think there is this part in that final 15% of proficiency where often you like make one misplay and you look back at the game and you're like, right, I in hindsight made this misplay and I think it lost me the game because I could have set up this game state where they couldn't kill this, or they'd have to attack in this particular way. I think it's a lot easier to identify your mistakes with some of these board state decks because the result of the game is often what plays out on the board, as opposed to potential iterations of pitch, of second, third cycle, of particular combinations of cards, arsenal cards, because at the end of the day, that card was just on the table. So that's something I learned very quickly with like Dromai and Enigma, playing those two decks. Is like I would get to the end of games and be like, oh, like this or this or this, and great learnings. But comparing it to other decks and making mistakes, I found a lot easier to identify those mistakes with a board state deck. So in some ways, actually, I think it's kind of easier to learn how to start to play those more proficient lines and get above that 80% than some other decks. I'm not saying Gravy's one of the easier decks to get super proficient with. Not at all. I do think it's in the upper echelons of harder decks to play, but I think it's more in the getting to that sort of 80% proficiency as opposed to the close to mastery. Because again, I never think anyone's ever going to master a deck, but I think the close to mastery is not as particularly difficult with Gravy. So I think basically I'd say to the 80%, I think it's in maybe the top 10 decks to do that with in terms of that mastery of proficiency, like that mastery sort of 90 to 95%. I think it's around middle of the pack personally.
Interesting. I would put Gravy in the high echelon for mastery as well. I do think Gravy is very difficult, particularly the bit around gold. I think this applies to the other two pirate heroes as well, to be honest. Except they don't make enough gold. But
that is a problem.
The gold mechanic in Gravy feels like he has this extra dial for how risk averse or risk tolerant he wants to be. And I think recognizing in which positions you need to be more risk averse and which situations you need to be more risk tolerant, I think is quite a bit of the mastery of that deck. It feels like when I'm playing against a good Gravy, they always have the gold to do what they need, and they're never frivolously using gold to try and make a line that's only a couple points better, but at the risk of losing the game. Whereas like the good Gravies know exactly when they need to stop using the gold and just be happy with the line they currently have, versus when they're like, oh, I'm behind and you take this risk. I think that whole aspect of the hero is actually very skill expressive and makes it, in my opinion, difficult to master and one of the harder decks to master. I wouldn't say he is the hardest deck ever, but I will put him up there as like top 5 probably. I guess I would need to actually make the full 5 to know if he makes the top 5, but I'll put him in the top 10 to master for sure.
Yeah. I think we're there or thereabouts. We're maybe like 1 or 2 places different. I agree. I think the gold thing is a huge part of it, massive part of it. And I point to other heroes in the past. I think Dromai was another in this camp. I personally think I'd have Dromai above Gravy in terms of complexity to play. And I think part of that is I think the Ash management was more difficult than the gold management, but also the combinations of the allies that you had on the board significantly changed the landscape of the game as opposed to what it does in Gravy, in my opinion. So like if you have, for instance, a Chum and a Sawbones out, or like Chum plus anything else, a lot of the lines are not really in your hands. They're kind of just in how your opponent decides to play. Whereas when you have, and also you get more iterations, right? Because you generally get more dragons out than you do allies in Gravy. I think just the different lines, the way you would attack, the ones you would prioritize, getting a second version of something on the board versus another, or the first copy of Necria versus a second Uvia or whatever it might be, or a second Chromai or something. I think were like really good examples of like, because your allies your dragons were your pitch, they were your defense, they were the cards you played with, the decisions were just so tight, I think, whereas the allies are a bit more one-dimensional, obviously not having a defensive value. So I think there's decks like that I think are some of the hardest to learn. I actually think Lexi was like quite hard to learn to like that mastery level as well. Like it's being able to beat fatigue and like setting up for these end games and like watching a master. So I watched the Taiwanese player Pei Tung Lao, I think his name is, the top 8 player from, I can't remember which PT top 8, but I was watching him at Singapore a couple of years ago playing Lexi, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this end game that he was playing towards, and just like the vision of how he was like setting up this particular Art of War turn. I was like, just kind of next level, honestly. And I don't think any other player could have won the game that I watched him win. So, yeah, quite interesting.
I agree with you on the Dromai piece. Dromai, for me, is firmly in the top 5 hardest decks in the game before. I will put Dromai, I think, harder than Gravy for a lot of the same reasons that you were talking about. But the Ash management in particular, which I do think is a bit tougher to do compared to like the ally management in Gravy. But I think a big reason was the Phantasm mechanic. The fact that Dromai's allies had Phantasm, I think added a whole new level of dimensionality on that deck, and to understand how to navigate that depending on the opponent's hero. It felt like every Dromai game was okay, not every. A lot of Dromai games were one. How to say, like a bad Dromai pilot would like lose like a whole bunch of games, whereas Gravy can still kind of just like high roll his way into like a bunch of wins. And Dromai felt like a little bit more fragile, basically.
Before time. Before time.
Yeah, before time. Yeah. And then you also needed to understand exactly how your opponent could interact with you. There's probably also a function of the time that Dromai existed, where Guardian was like still around. For like Oldhim was around kind of thing. So you needed to know how to deal with the whole Phantasm side of thing. You need to understand that game plan. Iceland was around. Yeah. And you need to understand that aspect of
Lixie
the matchup as well, where they could kill your dragons at instant speed. Your red line deck and Ice is around. So it might be a function of the time that she existed in.
That's a good point.
I feel like to pilot Dromai to perfection at that time is, I think, harder than it is to pilot Gravy right now to perfection. So that's why maybe that's what's influencing my decision to put her higher. But yeah, that's a bit aspect of it. I disagree with you on the Lexi part. I don't think getting her to mastery is as... I don't think... Like, yeah, it's hard in the same way any flesh and blood deck getting into mastery is difficult. But I don't think Lexi is like in the same conversation as like Gravy and Dromai, for example, for getting to mastery.
I think the adoption on Lexi... Yeah... I don't know, I go back and forth because like it really did make a big difference in terms of like how you place your... Like I would watch bad players all the time just make so many mistakes with Lexi and lose games, and I'd be like, man, this deck looks bad. And then I would like learn to play it, or I watch someone else play it, and I'm like, wow, like your timing on 3 of a kinds, the way that you look at what you're cycling through, the way that you manage your arsenal and your new horizon and thing is just like I don't think... Sorry, I think I need to rephrase this. I don't think it's one of the decks that are hard to get from 80 to 95. I think it's one of the decks that are maybe a bit harder to get to the 80. I think in terms of... I saw a lot of people playing Lexi at like 60 to 70, and it was so... Don't get me wrong, it was so powerful that often it just didn't matter. Like people would just be winning games anyway at 60 to 70%. But watching people who, you know, were maybe like the level of a PQ winner or something, right? So maybe they're playing at like 80% proficiency. I think it was actually quite hard to get to that point. There was a lot of concepts to understand. A lot of people hadn't played Ranger before. It was the first time that Ranger had sort of gotten a foothold in the game and been viable. So that's probably why I say that. I just think it's maybe in top 10 of decks to learn, sort of thing.
I'm going to add one more to the mix, which I think for me, again, is in firmly top 5 to master deck. I think that 80% is probably also tough, but like getting full mastery of this deck, I think, is right up there, like next to Dromai. For me, that's Dash.io. It's a similar concept where I feel like, there's these decks that have power in them, and you need to understand how to extract their power, but at the same time, they have this fragility to them. Mm-hmm. Like Dash.io has a fragility in terms of, I guess you might just draw too many non-blocks, but also the fragility to fatigue, which is, again, where it comes down to you need to have a level of knowledge about how your opponent's deck is interacting with you for your entire game plan. And you need to, similar to the Gravy dial I was talking about, Dash.io has so many turns where you need to decide whether you're expending resources right now and emptying the bag, so to speak, to send more damage on this turn, or whether this is a partial setup turn, or whether this is like a full setup turn. And you need to continuously know what stage of the game you're in with relative to the opponent that you're sitting against based on their game plan and their hero, to know whether this is you're actually supposed to arsenal this card or whether you're actually supposed to send this right now, because all that plays into whether you're going to get fatigued at the end, and whether you're supposed to activate a Foundry Heart right now to dig a little deeper, or is that way too aggressive. So that entire aspect of the hero, I think, puts her up there for me in the top 5 heroes to master. Yeah,
I actually really like that. And I think one other thing I'll point out with Dash.io is that I think Dash.io can be another victim of people misinterpreting skill and difficulty of learning a hero with a different variable. So we spoke about Leviah, right? And I think the challenges of where that deck sits in terms of its hero ability and maybe how strong the hero is overall. Something like Dash.io, you're going to... I think people will... There's some of the best players in the world who learn that deck and maybe get it to like 90, 95%, right? And you're like, you know, they're just cooking. You know, they're playing to all the things you just spoke about. They're still going to just lose these games where their deck just bricks. And people are going to attribute that to like different things, or that's going to mask like, it masks the skill level of like, you can be a skillful player, but it doesn't matter because this happens, or you don't need to be a skillful player because you just have to get lucky or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not the point. The thing is it's very hard to learn, it's very hard to play proficiently, and then yes, the result of like the fact that you're just going to draw the wrong combinations of cards sometimes can be very punishing and very obvious with that hero. But it doesn't take away from just how difficult it is with all the decisions, with all the variables you have, with all the different ways there's so many different lines of Dash.io. So I think it's such a great shout.
Yeah, because again, coming back to fragility, it's like she has several loss conditions, and you have to understand how to manage those. And if you do manage those, then you're cooking, right? I think
I think what you're looking
for. Do you want to bring up anyone else?
Well, I just think what you're looking for when it comes to, if you're looking for a way to understand, try and take away some of these external variables, is like in trying to decide if a deck is complex to learn or hard to learn, is difficult to master, etc., is resource management, loss condition management, like you just spoke about, win condition management, and how much possible interaction there is with different parts of the deck. So do they deck manipulate? Do they graveyard manipulate? Do they hand manipulate? Do they Arsenal manipulate? And then the other thing you can lay on top is their interaction with the opponent. So I think, I'm not going to go into it, but I think, because I'm sort of revising my thoughts as we go through this conversation, but I think assassins are somewhere in and around there because of the variables of having to interact with the opponent. I think more thinking about it, it's not as complex as maybe I thought on some of these. But wizards, for instance,
it's not the same level.
It's not the same level, but I think wizards have a lot of that, for instance, and in different levels depending on the wizard. For instance, Kano manipulates the top of the deck, right? So that already adds an extra layer of something you have to manage and have to understand.
Yeah, I mean, when you say wizards, I wouldn't put Verdance in that category. But
sure, okay.
I think Verdance is a little bit more. I could see Kano, Acilio to some extent, but to me, Acilio still doesn't quite crack that. Like, this is like a super hard deck to play, because it does feel a little bit more solitaire-y in a sense.
Yeah,
where it's like it feels like the difficulty of Acilio is understanding your own lines, more so than it is managing all these other variables that we're talking, like Dash and Draw might have to deal with.
Yeah.
Like Gravy to some extent.
I'm probably more talking Kano, I think, to be honest, because I don't even think I'm talking about Icelander. I think Icelander is probably the second most difficult wizard to learn and master, but actually in the grand scheme of things, I don't think Icelander is that crazy.
Yeah, I think eventually, like Icelander, I think was one of those where getting to 80% is probably a bit tougher, and a lot of people are like, oh my god, it's like difficult, but I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't put her in like a very terribly difficult deck to play. Kano, I think there was a time where he was more difficult than he is now. Now it feels a little bit more casino-y, like the current version of Kano. But there was a time earlier where you had to be a lot more intentional of when you're comboing off. And maybe that's when I'd put it. But it does feel like in a similar camp as like the Acilio point, where it's like does feel a little bit more solitary, a little bit less you care less about like how your opponent's interacting with your deck. It just felt like, okay, your opponent can block you out, then you pitch stack. And if your opponent isn't, then you're just going to tempo kill them. I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. Well, great question there from Sigma. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. I want to move on quickly before we get to the main topic. Reflections on the pod last week, because we spoke about some preview cards, and at the time, Pankaj, we're still learning these cards, we're still reading them, we're still getting to grips with them, and I want to apologize to our listeners, Pankaj, because I think we got a card wrong, and I don't think
you're setting out the bait right now.
I don't think we
just setting out the bait right
gave enough respect to Alpha Instinct last week on the pod. So I just want to apologize to everyone for that, because I think we ultimately we got it wrong. So there was also, just wanted to mention, there was a few comments about that card, take up the bait or something, fair enough. Yeah, I think that card does a few things. I think our ending point on that card was, what does it actually change? What does it solve for Riptide right now? And I don't think we got many comments answering that question, unfortunately. But if people want to provide us some thoughts on how Take the Bait can actually solve Riptide's myriad of problems, then we're all ears. Anyway, should we move on to the main topic of the pod?
Yeah, let's do it. I don't have too much more to add on that. Like, I'm still not convinced about this card. If someone can convince me on how it actually improves some of his bad matchups instead of it makes him better into this, or it does this, then I'm all ears, as you said.
Yeah, me also. It's traps. So that's just a trap, Pankaj. Let's get on to the main topic of the pod.
I would say.
Ban restricted predictions, possible impact. And I'm going to throw to you first because you want to give a bit of an introduction to the ban restricted update that we had a wee while ago. And I know you spoke about this on the pod at this point now, a few months ago when this change was first introduced. So I'm just going to throw it over to you for that.
Yeah, so a few months ago, they released the ban and restrictor announcement. That was the one that banned Counter Blessings and Germinate, I believe. And it was also the one that announced the new LL system, which is that new heroes, or heroes in the first year of their legality, will be getting points at half the rate than normal, and then heroes past 2 years of their legality get points at 1.5 times the rate. And I believe you were away for that pod, so I had Nathan Crawford as a guest host to come on, and we discussed this whole thing. And one point that was brought up was it felt like there was a little bit of a conflict. I'm not sure if conflict is the correct term here. Maybe a bit of a tension between the commitment to increasing the cadence of ban and restricted announcements and having a 0.5 times LL speed change. So something that we discussed was without this pressure to do something quickly when a hero is getting points way too fast, will they actually ban with the increased cadence that they said they were going to do? Because this was in the context of Aurora LLing within a year. And part of that was that she sort of got points way too quickly. And then they were like, okay, we're going to ban more aggressively. But then they also said we're going to have these heroes gain points at half the speed. So then I was like, this feels a little bit conflicting, because if you are banning at the cadence that you say you're going to ban and ban more aggressively, then why do we need this 0.5 times LL speed? There's like artificial deflation of LL points, if you will. And I feel that is kind of relevant for what's going on right now, because I feel like it's been 2 months that we've known Gravy's dominance. He is under the old LL system. He would be a third of the way to LL right now. He'd be sitting at 320. He's currently at 160, but he's been getting points at half the rate. He would be at 320 within 3 months. So he'd be on track to LL within 9 months, less than a year of him coming out. And it's been like, and we haven't seen any bans. So I just feel like that was something that I want to bring up again, because it was something that was brought up back then when this change was announced. It was like, okay, if you don't have this time pressure on you anymore to like do the bans, will you actually ban at a high frequency that you said you would? And I'm sort of questioning that all over again, basically, right now. Yeah, I feel like if he was at 320 points, we would have seen something happen by now. But because he isn't, it's been, in my opinion, not the increased cadence of bans that I thought we were expecting, or what we were promised.
I think one thing I do just want to, I'm not sure where I stand on that last point. I think one thing I do want to maybe just speak to quickly, though, is the cadence of ban and restricted. I was trying to go back through notes and also look back at the article that they originally published when they spoke about this, and I couldn't find it. And I was trying to remember if this was something that was spoken about at a keynote as well. So maybe if you've got the source of that, because my understanding was that it wasn't so much about the cadence of the ban restricted would increase. It was more about the fact that they would be more heavy-handed on the ban and restricted, potentially being more willing to knock cards off, like to ban cards or restrict cards, to be more sort of aggressive with that than they had been in the past, where they'd been maybe a little more sort of soft-handed, or they'd erred on the side of caution as opposed to not ban it, as opposed to now saying, actually, we will just ban it and we'll see what happens, as opposed to necessarily the cadence of the ban and restricted increasing, like the frequency of them increasing.
So I'll quote the BNR article I'm talking about, the one which banned Germinate. The quote I have is like it's the last paragraph, basically, before not the when the next BNR will be. But the sentence is, these updates, along with an increased cadence of bans, should help us avoid outcomes like the rapid ascension of Aurora Shooting Star in the future, while keeping a healthy number of points, blah, 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 blah. So I think the term increased cadence of bans is right there. So yeah, that would be... Okay. That's like my answer to
sure. Okay.
What you were saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then I feel like they've not necessarily done that, Like they've not necessarily increased it because
that's my point.
There was 2 months between the last ban and restricted announcement, right? Like if they were doing monthly bans, I would have been like, oh, you're increasing the cadence, but they haven't necessarily done that. So so it's not about being. That's
exactly my point.
So it's not about being heavy-handed or about being more aggressive on the actual bans themselves. It was meant to have more. So whether they would or wouldn't ban something, they would have had surely more of an opportunity to do so.
And that's why I bring up the 0.5 times LL change, because that's why I feel like the tension is. Because now there's no more, like, pressure, right? If Gravy was at 320, I think there would have been a bit of a fire, like, oh my god, we need to do something. But he's 160. And I feel like because of that, we're not really getting that cadence that they said we were going to get. I don't know. That's just...
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if, obviously, that link of causality isn't foolproof. I mean, it isn't ironclad. It's just I have to wonder whether if he was at 320, would we have seen something by now? Whereas him being at 160, maybe they're like, we can wait a little bit more.
It's a good question. I think I sit on the side of I don't think 320, for instance, is like alarm stations sort of thing. I think
3 months. He came out 3 months ago.
Yep, but I think they're okay with releasing powerful heroes, and then to this point. So this is where I get a little bit confused about the wording on this. I've also put up the article that you were speaking about now that I can find it. These updates, along with increased cadence of bans. So are they banning more frequently, or are they just having the opportunity to ban more frequently? So this is kind of, I was like, they didn't have a ban and suspended announcement for 2 months, but I'm confused whether they mean we will have more ban and suspended periods. So let's say they do a ban and restricted each month, but then if they don't actually use them, then they're not actually increasing the amount they're banning and restricting. Or are they just saying when we get to ban and restricted periods, we will do more ban and restricting? So for instance, if that's the case, so maybe in the past we get to 3 months, they might not have done anything previously. Say Monday comes along and they're like, actually, we think, we're gonna see it out. We're gonna see it out for another few months until we get to Super Slam or whatever, and then we'll make a decision on before we get to Worlds as to whether we do anything from a ban restricted announcement. Whereas now with this new added approach, because of just the combined, maybe keeping it separate to the Living Legend points, but just with this new approach, they're like, no, we definitely need to ban something now. From Gravy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what their thought process is on that. What I would say though is I think to your question about 300 could possibly be on 320 points. I think they would have felt that was an appropriate time to ban. I think it's less about the point because there's also a lot more events. The other thing you got to remember is there's a lot more events happening than there have been previously. So there's more callings. There's just more Living Legend points around. So I think part of the change in the point system was also around just the number of events, not just straight up how fast things are getting to Living Legend from singular events.
So I will push back on. I think they will find it appropriate because this cadence is literally Aurora's cadence, which is what led to this change in the first place. And they have said they felt that Aurora's cadence was too fast.
So what was the ban they made in Aurora?
They didn't, but they made this change after. No,
exactly.
But this whole 0.5 times LL thing and the whole push towards an increased cadence of BNRs was their reflections on how fast Aurora LL'd.
Yeah. So now they get a chance. So now on this coming Monday, they get a chance to stop Gravy from getting to the Aurora levels, right? Because they can make a ban.
That's the thing. I feel like it's more like it's a 0.5 times LL thing. It's not really the increased cadence of bans. But anyway.
Well, okay. No, I want to sit on that for a sec because so we're 3 months in.
Sure.
At even say it was 320 points. You make or potentially more on Monday. So maybe 350, whatever it is, 360. You make a ban to a card, and then Gravy is a tier 2 deck maybe, and it now takes 2 years for Gravy to reach that point. Haven't they kind of done what they said they were going to do? It wouldn't Living Legend at the same rate as Aurora because they have taken action on it, whereas they didn't take action on Aurora. So wouldn't it kind of be doing what they said they were going to do?
Yes, yeah, and yes, I do agree with that. But I do feel like it should have come earlier, basically, is kind of where I'm coming from. And I feel like why we didn't have it earlier was because of the 0.5 times LL speed. Again, like I said, that chain of causality isn't ironclad, but I do feel like that increased pressure, like it just feels like it's a lot easier to ignore when he's just sitting at 160 right now, rather than if he was at 320.
Okay,
basically.
But I don't think they are going to ignore him. I think we can talk about that as we get into the ban. I think they're going to make a hit on Gravy, which we can talk about our predictions. And I think that does, which I think I want to point out. I think that does do the thing that they've committed to doing, which is to more aggressively ban something than necessarily they did with Aurora, where they could foresee Aurora being a problem. It's also different in some ways because Aurora picked up steam, whereas Gravy started with a full head of steam to an extent, or it picked up its steam a lot quicker, right? So also, I mean, we don't even talk about the armory deck. Obviously, that didn't help things out. But I think to my view, so I think the one thing where we sit on different sides of the fence over this might just help people understand our point of views, maybe as we talk through this as well, is you feel they should have taken action on Gravy sooner. I feel now is the right time to take action on Gravy. I think that's basically our differences in viewpoints here, if that feels like I've summed it up.
Fair enough. But we both agree Gravy should be hit. And actually, I think maybe this is the way we can frame our predictions. Before we go into specific cards, let's talk about which heroes need to be hit first.
What should they do? What do we think they should do on Monday? In a wider perspective, what are the impacts we would like to see this ban list have, effectively? Yeah.
So we're both aligned on Gravy. Like he needs something hit. He's been knocked down a peg.
So to what? Let's have a quick deep dive on that a little bit. To what extent do you think Gravy needs to be hit? Do you think it's... Well, we can talk specific cards. We won't talk specific cards. We'll get into that in a minute. But do you think it needs to be a small hit to reduce consistency, or do you think it needs to be quite a large hit to reduce the overall power level and consistency of the hero to bring it down potentially a tier or half a tier sort of thing?
I think bringing it down one tier keeps him strong, because I do feel he's kind of like firmly in S tier right now.
Yeah, sure. So
I think he's holding... Sorry?
Yeah, bring him to A tier. Yeah,
exactly. Bring him to A tier. Like, I think he's firmly the only hero in S tier right now. Like, Slippy's good, but I would put Slippy in like A tier rather. Verdance is actually arguably potentially S tier. I mean, we'll get to Verdance in a bit. But I think just bring Gravy down one tier. I mean, I don't think any deck should ever be fully kneecapped in any BNR. Like, I just don't think that's a very healthy way to approach it. So I think he should remain playable. But yeah, I think it feels like... What I'd like for them to hit from him is to make him feel more like a mid-rangey deck with board state rather than an aggro deck with board state. Because I think my issue with him is that he's outputting straight up numbers that are beating aggro decks. Yeah. And I feel like that is just a step too far. Like let him keep that into like a mid-range board state deck rather than, all right, here's like 20 damage and an ally left behind. Yeah, which I think just brings him down like one tier and then...
Yeah, you don't necessarily take issue with a lot of the in-game stuff. Is the fact that they can pressure so much and then still do this crazy in-game while the opponent's in a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation because of the early game being so strong as well.
Exactly, and that's like the cards like the Swells and the Tipples, which just like give them so much card advantage, and they're putting numbers like old aggro decks. And it's like, what are we doing here?
Okay, so what else do you think needs to happen on Monday?
Wait, I need to spin it back to you. You didn't answer. What do you think? How do you think Gravy should be
I feel the same.
hit?
Yeah, I feel the same. I think
Very cool.
I think you need to knock in my view, you need to knock the top sort of like 15 to 20% off the deck in terms of the damage output it can, just the amount of just very strong turns it can do, I think is what it... So it dropped the consistency a little bit, and there's a couple of cards we can talk about in terms of I think will help do that. That just give them these consistent with minimal setup damage outputs, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, and I think to some extent, I think just some of the numbers on the deck just don't make sense. Like alongside like some of the combination of cards like with Death Threads, I'm just like, is Chum's just a straight up 2-card 10 a lot of the time? 2-card 10 where part of that is like there's a Chum on the field, and so he's like normally extracting even more value than that because of the cards like Death Thread. So it's like, is it Chum? Is it Death Thread? Because if you didn't have Death Threads to pay for the Chum, I think Chum's a lot more reasonable. But if you're going to continue letting him have Death Threads, and like Chum becomes like, it feels the numbers are egregious. Same with like Rigor Mortis and Sawbones, where it feels like because of Dead Threads, the numbers just get a bit too egregious on a whole bunch of these allies.
So we can get into cards. We can get into cards.
Yeah, it's a little point the blame on like a certain thing, but yes, I'm with you. Where it's like the numbers somewhere are just kind of mathing up to way too high, and needs to knock off that top 15 and 20% as you're talking about.
Cool.
Next here, I think there's been a lot of conversation where Slippy needs to get hit, and maybe this is a hot take, but I feel like if Gravy gets a hit that he deserves, and Earth gets to play again, like if Florin and Verdance actually come back into the meta, I'm not entirely sure if Slippy needs a hit. And I think that's a bit of a macro sort of snowball effect where it's like, okay, you've brought their bad matchups back and you're hitting them as well. I'm not sure if they need both, but that's kind of contingent on how much they hit Gravy, right? And whether Earth can still actually come back and play again. So what do you think on that aspect?
Yeah, I don't think I mean, I think the Slippy's strength, this is probably the easiest way to put it, is Slippy is, I think, the most consistent deck in the format right now. And it has it just plays very nicely into the format right now. But to your point, if Earth is there to... What Slippy's weakness is the fact that when a deck is able to deal with the split damage, when a deck is able to interact more naturally
at
with
reaction speed.
Yeah, with your game plans, it's really difficult for Slippy. So I don't think necessarily it's doing anything particularly egregious. I do think the hero ability naturally lends itself to a powerful, aggressive deck, and obviously you have disruption as well. So I am on the fence on Slippy. I think it depends on what they do around it. I think they could do something, and we can talk about what that looks like. I think if it's the case, just going back to our question about Gravy, I think it's minor. I think what it is basically a tweak to reduce a particular angle of attack that is hard to interact with, to reduce the power of those best turns effectively. So, and I think it probably comes down to a reaction effectively, which we can talk about. I think that's what gives it those really powerful turns that feel just so disgusting.
I think maybe the ban is more around negative play experience rather than sheer power level, I guess. Is that a fair way to phrase what you said, or do you actually mean power level wise?
No, I think slightly decreasing there because it's so consistent. I think it's nice to have this consistent deck. I think, but it's high end of its power turns are frequent enough and strong enough. I think if you could just tweak the strength down a little bit, I think that would be a good place to be potentially. I don't think the play experience is bad.
I feel like it's a consistent deck, but it's in the context of Earth isn't really allowed to play the game right now. And when Earth comes back in, I'm just like, okay, you're consistent, but you're still not like a Florin matchup is just straight up miserable.
Yeah.
For example, so it's just like, okay, like, do you also need to get a hit if Florin gets to come back and play the game? And like Verdance picks up in popularity, like, I don't know.
And kind of Guardians as well. Guardians have that problem of not being particularly able to play in the space, and also they have to lean their deck so heavily in a particular direction right now, which is just so good for Slippy. Like, I actually think Slippy has good matchups into kind of most of the Guardians right now because of the way that they're forced to build, and I think that changes potentially, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, you don't need to touch Slippy. Like, Slippy hasn't... I said this to you earlier, but before we weren't recording, but Slippy hasn't changed much. Like, I'd say the decks have definitely been refined, which is fantastic, but the decks haven't changed massively since it first came out. It's just a result of the current meta in a big way.
Yeah. The meta has just shifted all around it. Like when Slippy first came out, that's like people were still like playing Marinette for a little bit, but Nu was around. That was like a big thing. Like Nu was around, Enigma was around, and Aurora was around. Where it's like, okay, you take a card from Aurora and she doesn't care. She's outvaluing you anyway. Yeah. So at that point, it's like, Slippy's not playable. But then now we're in this meta where everyone's trying to play Solitaire basically, because Gravy's playing Solitaire and people that are trying to beat Gravy need to play Solitaire, and Slippy's like, oh, okay, cool. I get to my disruption matters, my aggressive, disruptive-esque game style is just very conducive for this current meta. But if the game becomes a bit more mid-rangey, Earth comes back, even if Warriors come back, and suddenly Slippy is a bit like, doesn't feel as strong anymore.
Yeah.
Should we move on to and talk about Verdance?
Yeah, because we spoke last week about, obviously, what's the new card called? Something Leaves? Rustling Leaves?
Light Up the Leaves.
Light Up the Leaves. Being a very, very powerful upgrade to the hero. And both of us kind of feeling like, if something happens to Gravy, does this make Verdance just kind of busted? Like, I was very much of the opinion coming into the national season before, Gravy was built well, before people were still learning the hero and refining it, that Verdance was just the best hero in the format. And obviously Gravy significantly closes that angle down for Verdance. Like, it's just such a tough matchup that it helps push Verdance out. But just an upgrade and a potential hit coming to Gravy, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, Verdance seems like it might just be kind of broken, honestly.
Yeah. If the Gravy, currently the Gravy Verdance matchup is miserable. According to the data, I know some Verdance stands are going to yell at me and be like, oh no, they can fatigue a Gravy every time. I'm just looking at calling data and Pro Tour data. Verdance Gravy matchup, absolutely miserable. It's like 20% or something like that, or 25% for the Verdance. So going by that, it's like Verdance is sort of a little bit being kept in check by Gravy. But if that matchup gets somewhere close to a 50-50 from the Gravy hit, then I'm completely with you. Then I'm like, what's Verdance's bad matchup anymore?
Well, also,
it's like Syndra,
all your other matchups get better as well.
Not even... Yeah, it's like, well, is Syndra bad? I guess Syndra's a bit of a negative matchup, but it's not that bad.
Yeah.
And then maybe Gravy still stays slightly negative, but if it's still in like the 40-ish range, then I'm like, okay, but a lot of these other decks, Verdant's just like trounces. So she probably would need to dial down as well. Because I think the only other matchup I can think of that's like bad is maybe like Prism, but even that isn't. It's not horrendous anymore, especially with like Red Fruits of the Forest and stuff like that. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like bad, but it's like in the slight negative, and then you have all these other decks that don't have a fighting chance into you. So she might need a hit. Might need a small shave off the top.
The upgrade is just so significant. Like, it's like, yeah, you know, take away... So I'm looking at stats on Teleshar right now. Verdance has a 56% win rate currently on Teleshar, right? It's bad matchups. It's 41 into Syndra. It's 37 into Gravy, which is no surprise. And then it's like 43 into Kano. And then I think that's it.
Prism? What's a Prism?
Prism's like 40% as well. Okay, so... Other than that, every other matchup is good for Verdance. And then you're introducing a card which makes its good matchups even better. It gives you this Earth 3 block that helps you decompose, and is also just helps your bad matchups because it helps you go tall with damage. And that's before people even think about the fact that I think Verdance has now the opportunity to go back into a very different configuration of Shell and start to put Channel Millennium Tree back into the deck. Which is just all of a sudden you're like, hey, here's just 9 tall damage and I can do it consistently. It's like, that is absolutely disgusting. Plus you can plume the frigging card, like the light up the leaves. I think it's potentially a 1-card hit, but I don't think it's a small hit. I genuinely think Verdance might just be kind of cracked. Like if Gravy gets the hit. And even if Gravy doesn't get the hit, like it doesn't get as significant a hit as maybe what you're talking about, I actually still think maybe Verdance is just like, well, it just beats everything else. And at that point, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. It might be fine, but
I could totally see Verdance just sort of filling up the oppressive spot that like kind of Gravy currently is, in a sense. Wouldn't be as bad because I think she has more bad matchups than Gravy does. But yeah, it would be in a similar spot, which would warrant a bit of a shave off the top for her as well. And I think another aspect to talk about for these two heroes in particular, Gravy and Verdance, is the context of the new set coming out, like Super Slam, which is a Brute and Guardian set.
Yeah.
Like, if these two heroes remain untouched, then that set might as well just not even release, right? I mean, unless there's something really weird going on with those Guardians, which, to be fair, there could be. Like, Pleiades and Lyoth are both very, very different in terms of the Guardians that we've seen. The two Brutes, not so much, though. I feel like, I don't say those two Brutes are ever dealing with Gravy or Verdance in their current iterations. Yeah. And the Guardians are unlikely to do so as well because they're Guardians. So, yeah, I feel like part of the reason why these two heroes maybe need to be hit is also in the context so that, hey, let's Super Slam release and actually have impact instead of like a bright light situation.
Yep. Is there any other macro impacts you think, or like even micro impacts we could see from the ban restriction announcement? Anything you think that, are there any other heroes or any other cards that you think could be looked at, or potentially any unbans?
I actually didn't even think about unbans. I feel like everything on the ban list, or at least what I remember on the ban list, is kind of deserves its place there. Like stuff like CYB, Processor, a High Octane, I mean.
High Octane, yeah.
Out of War and stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of the...
just unban Tome with the win so we can get rid of Kano and move back to our lives. I don't know. Yeah, sorry, you were saying?
Well, I don't think any of the cards that they banned during the banning of the books, right? Fundamentally, I don't think any of those cards are ever going to be unbanned, right? So, because I was thinking, I was like, Tome Firebrand, I think you could actually, there's a place for that card in this meta, but I just don't think they're ever going to unban any of those cards.
Syndra gets broken, right?
I don't think it gets broken. I don't think it's broken.
She has Flick to pay for that as well. Like, she doesn't even need to pitch to pay for the card. I feel like it gets kind of nuts. If you give,
I would like to see that card introduced as a one-off potentially, but it's besides the point because they're just not going to do it. So I don't think there's any cards that are on the unban list this time around. I have been pulling for this for a while. I think they should ban Remembrance. I think we should get rid of Remembrance.
I could see that. I'm not a big fan. I guess I would see that as like a preemptive ban. As like, I don't think right now it's occupying the degenerate space. Like, no. I think normally when you talk about Remembrance, you're thinking of like the full fatigue. I'm just going to recur like 3 cards like 3 times in the game and just absolutely like block you out and then like use my weapon to kill you sort of thing. We're not in that spot. So if you ban Remembrance now, it would be as a preemptive thing, not as an answer to currently. I think currently the only place you see Remembrance is in Katsu so that he can double bonds the Earth heroes twice. It's kind of, I feel like it's the only time I've seen Remembrance in recent metas.
Yeah, it's floated around. I mean, there's obviously been metas where it's been a significant impact, and it's been like, oh, I played 2 Remembrance for this mirror, like, oh, I'm playing 2 Remembrance and Joromai for this mirror match and stuff like this. And there's been times where I'm like, just get rid of the card. I just yeah, and I know it's been talked about by the devs before. Is like, is this a card that we need in the game? I would be fine if they finally kicked it out, but
do we need to talk about Acilio at all?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'm not saying that we need to, but I was just like, I feel like as we go over these other macro and micro impacts, I feel like that's the only other hero that's sticking out to me as something significant to just potentially just mention. Again, I'm not entirely sure on the other side.
I think it's a good shout. I think where it is right now is in a really nice spot. I think what's interesting is this kind of, it has got a glass cannon sort of style to it, right? In terms of what disruption does to it, in terms of, sometimes, and talk about play experience, right? Sometimes you play against Cecilia and you're like, wow, that was so unfun for me. My opponent had a great time because they just went absolutely nuts by turn 3. I want those decks in the game. I do want those decks to exist. I want them to be very fallible though, and I want them to have weaknesses. And I think Acilio is I honestly kind of think Acilio is perfect. Honestly, I'm not an Acilio player, but I have picked up my cards recently, and I kind of just think Acilio is just the perfect example of what that should be to me.
I think Acilio is similar to Slippy, where he's just a very positive recipient of the current meta. Where, again, everyone's trying to play Solitaire, and if you don't play Solitaire into Acilio, he will blow you up. Like Slippy can like disrupt you, but Slippy, like, it feels like disruption exists in this meta, but I will argue it is like lower than previous meta when Nu was around, for example. Slippy isn't like Nu levels of disruption, not like Icelander levels of disruption before that kind of thing, or even a Guardian level of disruption, I'd argue, which makes it a very good time for Acilio to show up. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm not entirely sure if his raw power level is high enough, because once a bit more disruption comes in, like say if one of the Guardians is playable, then I feel like he might have a bit of a tough time.
Let's talk cards. Let's talk cards like a target. I think Gravy's gonna be the big one. So what do you think? If you're gonna make hits to Gravy, we think it needs to be a fairly significant hit, reduce the early game, or just the damage output that this deck can so easily do as an aggressive deck, the kind of 20% on the top. What do you hit, Pankaj? What are the options on the table?
I feel like almost every card in the deck has an option. Like if you tell me Portside Exchange got banned, I'd be like, yeah, I could totally see that as well, because it just leads to like kind of just nuts turns sometimes. It's like, wait, why'd you make a gold and get your blue in the yard and refresh your card? Like the big problem with Gravy is that every card that says discard is actually fake. It's kind of like when Chain played Art of War and the banish was fake because you're just playing out of a banish zone anyway. That's like every card that says discard in Gravy. So I feel like any of them could be a potential hit. But I think we spoke about Death Threads a little bit. I'm like, that is also it's like a legendary, so it's like they probably won't. But I feel like that kind of just messed up all the balancing around like what the resource curves of these allies should be. Makes it really, really weird. And then another thing is he has so many cards which just fulfill every conditions of his quest, right? I think we've been seeing a little bit of a shift towards hero design being like, fulfill this quest and get your payoff. But he has cards that are like the quest and the payoff all in one card, like stuff like Chart the High Seas, where it's like, okay, this is your blue that goes to your yard, but that yard also pitches itself and also helps you fill your yard and makes you a gold. And it's like what? Like, why does it do like so many things? And like Swell as well, and Tipple, it's like, here's your discard, makes you your gold as well, which is part of your engine, and draws you a card, so you didn't even like feel the discard. Discard's fake anyway. It's like the card advantage that Tipple puts out is out of war levels of it's card really advantage. Yeah. It's just like like that's what I mean. I feel like so many cards in the deck you could like point at and be like, that could take it. I'll be like, yes, that could take a hit.
So let's try and break it down a little bit. So I think we both agree that the allies aren't the areas to hit, though. It sounds like they're not cards you're speaking of specifically. You don't think hitting the ally? I don't think so. I think hit the enablers personally.
If you tell me you ban Rigor Mortis, I could be like, I think that could be fine, actually. Just you ban 3 copies of Rigor Mortis. I think that's part of the shaving of the top, right? Part of the why his output feels like an aggro deck is because he has this freaking Rigor Mortis that's like attacks for 6 on 1 resource, and the 1 health is fake against your exactly, unless you're against exactly ninja. So the 1 health is actually more like 3. So I could totally see Rigor Mortis, honestly.
Because
all Sawbones.
I think I could see restricting allies. I think restricting 2 allies, potentially, like restricting Rigor Mortis, maybe. I think restricting Chum is maybe too specific a hit in terms of the matchups where it's not the intended outcome like we just spoke about, right? I think if we want to decrease some of those like pure damage output turns, I think maybe a Sawbones Rigor to your point. I actually like restricting. I think the use of restrictions against Gravy Bones could be a really good way to go, restricting it to a single copy.
So, I will point out same thing as like the precedent on they've never banned a legendary in like CC.
Mm-hmm.
They've never restricted anything in CC. They've banned all copies
Colors,
of certain
yeah.
colors.
Yeah.
But they've never been like, you're only allowed one of this card.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be breaking a precedent. Although I think they are open to breaking precedents.
They've done
We've
it
seen
for
that.
other
Like,
formats, though. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no, they've done it in CC too. Like with the first time, they only banned like certain colors of bonds. That was them breaking the precedent, right?
Well, they did it. Autumn's Touch. Autumn's Touch. They did it with Autumn's Touch.
No, they banned all copies of Autumn's Touch.
Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They banned.
Too. Sorry, Bonds
They fully
was the
banned
first
Autumn's
one.
Touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bonds was the first time where they're like, we're only allowing you to have the reds. So maybe they break the precedent again, where maybe they're like, okay, Rigor Mortis and Chum are like just one-offs now. But I think there are other ways to like reduce the.
Yeah. I think Dead
the power
Threads
of
is
the
the
decks
least
and
likely, by the way. I think Dead Threads is the least likely.
I agree. I want to take a moment here to talk about more than just the power level. I want to touch a little bit on negative player experience and try and hear your thoughts on that. Something that people talk a lot about when it comes to Kano and the negative play experience of Kano is that on their combo turn, they're kind of just
Solitary.
taking 15 minutes to do their thing.
Yeah.
And then you're just sitting there waiting for a moment to interact. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's every other Gravy turn.
Really?
Like pretty much every other Gravy turn, he's taking like 50 game actions. He's got 6 cards in his pitch zone. He's making a goal, he's cracking it. He's making another goal, he's discarding a card, playing something from the graveyard, searching through his deck, revealing cards off the top. It's and I do wonder whether that's maybe an aspect we should talk about as well as we try and predict what card they might hit. And I just want to get your thoughts on that. I feel like it's quite a negative play experience because I'm like, okay, you took 50 game actions, and my turn is I'm gonna clear an ally and pass because that's all I can do. That's the only thing that makes sense for me to do, because and pass back to you, and then you're doing another 50 game actions. So, do you think part of the ban should touch on that, or do you like maybe you just don't agree on the negative play experience aspect of it at all?
I do agree on some of the negative play aspect, but it's not what you're speaking about. It's when you're like, wow, you had a 3-card hand and you just dealt me 20 damage and you got to keep an ally on the board. That's the negative play experience for me, where I'm like, right. Oh, and you've done that 3 times this game. That's quite consistent. That's the negative play experience for me. Them cracking gold and going on a quest to find things is, I find, quite thematic, and I want some of that in this game. I want some of those like kind of set up a resource, go for a payoff pieces. I just think the access to the gold is too easy to come by, and that's why I think I'm ready to give you what I think they should do. I'm very clear on what I think they should do.
I'm just going to tangent real quick and be like, man, I wish Marlin had like half the gold generation in Gravy. I do feel like they sort of like, I don't know what happened where it's like how Gravy has like infinite gold, it feels like, and then Marlin's sitting there and like my harpoon doesn't have innate gold on hit. They need to actually discard the card to the harpoon for me to get the gold. I'm like, did it really need that? It's a 2 for 6 that it's so hard to send because I need to find a way to put it in my arsenal in the first place, and you couldn't just let me have gold on hit as default. Like, what is this? Meanwhile, Gravy's getting like 20 gold a turn. Anyway, random tangent there. But yes, please, I'm ready to hear your take.
I'm going to go from least likely to most likely. I think we're not banning Dead Threads as much as I think actually that would solve a big chunk of the problem. Would just be straight up banning Dead Threads.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll do that because I think it's too marquee to the hero. But, maybe they just pull the trigger and they're like, you know what, we've seen Gravy for a while, we're going to make this happen, work out how you play Gravy without Dead Threads, which I actually think would be really interesting. Do they also need to hit something else if they do that? I'm not sure. I just don't know enough. I think Dead Threads is a massive impact. I think they could. They won't touch Conquer the High Seas. It's a pirate card. It's just too much impact on other things. That's just not happening. I think they could restrict some allies like we just spoke about. I think that is probably the second most likely thing. I think the best approach is you do something similar to what you did with bonds. You ban red and yellow tipples, golden tipple. You ban yellow and red. You allow blue, and you restrict Chart the High Seas to a single copy. That is my view of what they do.
Okay. I don't like banning red tipple because I think it affects Marlin a bit too much. I guess you could argue that doesn't matter, and they have definitely done
it
bans
does
in the
matter,
past where
but
they don't fully care about the side
Bonds for
effects
Katsu?
unlike the other heroes. Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
right? I feel, I think I want them to get rid of just every card that pitches a card from the top, like chart the high seas and swells. Just get rid of those. Like I'm the whole I randomly flipped into back alley break line and then and also I played a blue that also pitched a blue. Like that whole thing is just quite egregious, especially when he has as much access to gold as he currently has. And it's like, okay, so that it pitched the blue was my blue that went to a yard, also drew me a card because I got extra resources now to draw off my gold. That whole thing I think just leads to like the massive power spike turns, which I don't think he like actually needs.
So I don't disagree. I kind of like the aspect of using all these blues, like the kind of idea of like you have to play all these blues and use all these blues to be able to do things. So like blue swell, for instance, I'm fine with because the damage output attached to the swell itself is minimal, right? But it does put a blue into your graveyard. Like it's a powerful card, 100%. But what I more take issue with is just the damage output that can be done on these turns. Because I like the idea of having to be like, okay, you get your chart the high seas restricted to 1. If you want to do the back alley break line play, you don't just randomly do it off a chart. You've got to set that shit up because you only have one chart, the high seas in your deck, sort of thing. Like that's what I'm more interested in. Is like if you're going to be able to do these strong plays, it's a lot harder because you don't just you lose 6 gold out of your deck from your red tipples and your yellow tipples, for instance, but you still get to keep the blue one, which is thematic to the deck. You get to keep 1 copy of chart the high seas to do this thing. That is what I quite like. As an idea, is just restricting some of that damage and gold generation. But and chart the 3 copies of chart the high seas just means that you get to do some insane stuff. I remember when people were playing 2 copies of chart the high seas for a bit. What is going on here? Anyway,
it's because people were baited by Give No Quarter.
Yeah, they were.
People were like, oh, you have to run Give No Quarter, and then turns out no, that card's not great. Just run the chart because it makes you gold. It pitches a blue,
does everything you want
in the
to.
yard. It's an outline. Yeah, chart and tipple just feel like these cards do. It fulfills the quest and is the payoff and gives you more of an engine. It just does it way too much.
Yeah.
Whereas the other heroes are like, oh, this is my thing that makes my engine. This is the payoff. This is the quest thing.
Dude, Puffin's still looking for
cards that do everything.
Puffin's still looking for anything. It's looking for any kind of engine.
Yeah. And it's like I see like Puffin this way they like have to run like Loan Shark or something. Like, oh my god, that card does one thing. And Gravy's like, I have Tipple that does that and like 6 other things. It's like, all right.
Anything else to say about Gravy before we quickly cover off maybe the other 2 heroes before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure. I could see them hitting the gold generation, like what you said, like ban tipples, like some colors of tipples, because it has a snowball effect where it means it's less hook activations, which is overall even less gold, which I think would be good. But I could also see like if you're talking about shaving off the top, I think the pitching cards off the top is kind of what leads to those egregious turns. It's when they have like 5, 6, 8 resources floating because they're like, I went chart the high seas and I went swell and I have all this excess resources. So like that's another thing I could see them hitting. Or I could see them even going down the ally route and being like, some of these allies' resource curves just don't make sense with the existence of death threads, like Rigor Mortis and Solvents. Like, do they really need to be 1 for 6 attacks? Like that, it's like so much, given that the health totals are also more than what's like printed on the card most of the time because of how most decks need to deal with it. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of copping out here, being like, here are the 6 different things they could hit. But I do honestly feel that way. I think any one of these 10 targets could be the one.
Sure.
Yeah. That's all I have to say on Gravy.
I have a card for them to print for our friend Marlon and hit all the golden tipples. That's fine. You hit all those cards. And then just print a card, maybe 1 in each, maybe a pirate ranger and a pirate mechanologist card that just says create a treasure island token on the field.
Then you can't play it against Gravy because of the infinite gold again. It's like,
yeah, but who cares? Gravy's getting nerfed anyway. I want to play Puffin, man. I want to play Puffin, but I need a treasure island in the play to actually freaking play the hero.
I want to play Marlin. Honestly, I'm just like, once Gravy's switched to Balance of Justice into Marlin, I was like, oh, okay, I can't play anymore. When they were on Crown of Dominion, I was like, wait, we can actually play the game? Then we switched to Balance. I was like, oh, it's over. Tragic. I
apologize for your cope. Slippy. Let's talk Slippy. I think we both agree that more likely than not, nothing needs to be done about Slippy. But if they do, I think I have some considerations. I think you have to be really careful about not hurting Marionette, because I think Marionette is it's an interesting hero. It's a hero that people want to play. It's a hero that's kind of on the fringes of the format as well. I think you have to be very careful about that. So I was going through some things of like, I spoke before about, I think what you need to do is potentially reduce the consistency of the power, or like a little bit of those most powerful turns in terms of what they look like, because it is a very consistent hero. So the one that makes the most sense to me is Take Up the Mantle, because that's what allows you to kind of be like, I played my first bonds, and then here's 2 to 3 more bonds over the next 4 to 5 turns to just absolutely rip your deck apart and not let you play the game. Speaking about negative play experience, right? So, but the problem with Take Up the Mantle is that it really hurts Marionette, I think, to hit Take Elemental. So I think where I landed is I ban Just a Nick if you're going to do anything, and that, or restrict Just a Nick. I'm actually kind of a fan of restricting cards personally, but I just don't think they need to do anything after thinking about it all. I don't think any other thing outside of those 2 cards is not impactful, and I don't think is worth doing without hurting Marionette. And so at that point, I'm like, just don't do anything.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes down to how much are they going to be hitting Gravy. Are they hitting Gravy to the point where Earth comes back in? Because if it does happen, I'm not entirely sure if Slippy actually needs that hit. I will say the Take Up the Mantle point, to me, falls under the negative play experience thing. Because there's no playing around it, which I think is the most frustrating part of the card. Yep. It's like, oh, there's an Infect coming in.
It's terrible to
like,
play
okay, cool.
around it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, cool. I can take an Infect, and suddenly like, oops, no, it's a surprise Bonds of Agony, haha. And you're like, okay, cool. It's like you just had like no agency. Except, but that's the thing. Unless Earth comes back, and then they have all these prevention effects, and it's like, oh, you're flicking on this Infect. You know, I'm gonna prevent this because it feels like you might be up to some no good, basically. So it's like, yeah, again, I don't know. But it's negative play experience for like everything else, so it doesn't have the prevention effect. So yeah, and then just a Nick restriction. I'm not sure what the point of that would be, because I just don't know how much that actually hurts the deck.
It stops some of your high level of your damage outputs. That's the kind of thing, because just a Nick, either first cycle or second cycle, is the power of that card when you set it up is just kind of insane. So I think it does hurt some of it, and it also is a card that doesn't hurt Marionette necessarily. Yeah. So that's my piece on it.
Actually, I want to come back to unbans real quick. I just realized there is one card that I could see being unbanned. Speaking of Earth coming back, Germinate. Why is Germinate still banned?
Yeah, well, if Gravy gets hit, maybe Germinate should still be banned. I don't know.
I feel like Florence is still not beating Verdance with a card, or still not beating Gravy with a card. So
yeah,
I feel like it could come back. I don't hate the idea of like Germinate coming back. I'm not entirely sure if it'll be like egregious.
Yeah, fair.
Germinate comes back.
There's a card I was thinking about this the other day. Is about this whole thing with Slippy and do you need to hit stuff. There are cards people can be playing that they don't play to prevent damage, which is quite interesting. So I actually think I would love to see
Calming Breeze.
Yeah,
Calming Breeze.
Calming Breeze is one, but even like Seeker's equipment, I think I'd love to see them print a Majestic equipment that is like just prevented damage. I think. But anyway, let's not tangent. So
should we talk about Verdance?
Yeah. Yes. I just have a
top.
Right,
what can they have?
Well, I think if they're gonna print this card, which they are printing, I think they've got to hit Plume. Honestly, personally, I think Plume is just kind of ridiculous. The fact that you can just then, first of all, I think Verdance is just gonna have so many different angles of attack with. Do you need to be a combo deck? Honestly, you might not even need to worry about being a rampant growth combo deck anymore, honestly. But if that's the way that you beat particular tough matchups who are trying to, gain life or sort of like grind you out of the game, then Plume also hurts there, but also instant speed Plume to get back the Rustling Leaves to then Storm Striders, is just absolutely disgusting. So I think Plume is personally a good hit. It doesn't hurt Florian at all either. Although, yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if that's enough.
I hadn't considered Plume, but I feel like the more you talk about it, I'm like, ooh, I could actually totally see that. Where, yeah, then it's like suddenly the slower decks have a bit of a fighting chance instead you instead of being like kind of deterministically dead the moment you flip up your hero. Because there could be draw sequences where your rampant growths are coming at like a wrong time. It puts a bit more skill expression on the villains as well to navigate the bad hands. Whereas now it's like, yeah, you just get one in the yard, you sort it out later. Play your first one for like one life, it doesn't matter. Arsenal the other one, you draw your life gain and you just kill them. Whereas that way they need to like actually manage that resource a little bit more. I actually don't hate it. The more you bring that up. I was wondering, I was just like, man, I don't know. Does Florian play Tilling? Like, can you just hit Tilling from Verdance and be like, okay, hurt your consistency a little bit. But I feel like your Plume one is getting more convincing the more I think about it.
Yeah, they can't ban burn beer or anything, but it's like I also don't know. It's like Plume. I think it's Plume for now, and maybe just see how things go.
Yeah, I could see that. I was like also Mental Block is also like a very strong card. I'm like, and it also makes her a little bit more susceptible to the assassins too. You're taking away prevention effect from her. That's also like card. So it's a very strong, solid card that isn't really replaceable by anything else either. So I was like, I think that could be a hit. It might not be enough though.
Yeah, you can't hit Millennium Tree. You can't hit Felling the Crown. Not even sure Millennium Tree is the right card right now anyway. Fruits, I don't know. Fruits could be an interesting card.
As long as you don't touch the blue one, because then you're hitting Florian for no reason. Because
so ban yellow and red fruits.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, it's tough.
It is tough. It's kind of tough to like figure out a good Verdance ban. Like the Plume, the Plume I think makes sense. It basically only hits the combo side of the strategy, and puts more skill expression on to execute the combo. So I feel like I don't hate that.
You could also just hit something that hits Florian if they don't care too much about it. So like Fruits, Rootbound Carapace, whatever. The other one I think that's worth floating in this discussion is Pulsing Ether Life, but it feels like such a marquee card of what their hero is that I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah, it's also not very strong.
But if you do that in combination with Plume, I think it takes away.
Oh, that's probably that might be under kneecapping. I think
maybe
that might be under
maybe.
Like the strongest thing about Pulsing Ether Life is that it says Earth. It's like Earth block 3 non-attack.
Yeah.
By
one in one out.
I would say it's like weaker than that. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, I think that is all our discussion on the predictions of Banned and Suspended. Of course, you will all find out, along with myself and Pankaj on Monday, what actually happens, see how right or wrong we were, and what the impacts are next of these banned and restricted announcements, and where we go from here. I mean, there's also likelihood that they maybe touch Living Legend again. I don't know. They're probably still waiting for more information on that before we get closer to Worlds. I'm sure that'll be that sort of time frame. No one plays Blitz, doesn't matter. So I think all eyes on CC right now, because Super Slam's about to release, obviously, and only they know the full impacts of what Super Slam brings. We can only guess at this stage with what we've seen. So, yeah, anything else to add, Pankaj, before we sign off?
Speaking of things we can only guess, it's a Copenhagen winner, because as we are recording many days early, we've only seen day one, and I'm excited to see how the rest of the tournament plays out. When you're listening to this, you already know how it plays out. So
very true. Well, that has been episode 228 of Arsenal Pass. Thank you to all Arsenal Pass patrons, and until next week, we'll see you in the next episode.